I'd like to call the investment committee to order. And with that, newest counsel, Ms. Rosalind Bell, would you please take the roll for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Controller Yi. State Treasurer Ma. Mr. Prasad.
Here.
Ms. Higa.
Here.
Ms. Yamamoto.
Here.
Ms. Dillon.
Here.
Ms. Hendricks.
Here.
For the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Yamanaka.
Here.
For the Director of the Department of Finances, Ms. Whitaker.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. We'll just take 10 seconds, given our leadership on the issue of gun violence and our engagement with companies around sensible gun control laws, and Mr. Ailman's leadership on the gun principles in America, which are nonpartisan. We'll just take 10 seconds to think about our colleagues and the children of Colorado. Thank you. Okay. The action items, the first is the approval of the committee agenda and work plan. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda and work plan.
So moved.
It's been moved and second. Without objection, it has been adopted. Item 2 is the approval of the minutes. Are there any amendments or changes to the minutes from March 2019 meeting?
You should have in front of you a revised version of the minutes. Some of our very eagle-eyed board members have pointed out some of the
Thank you, Brian.
some of the
So,
issues, so we've revised them accordingly.
without objection, the revised minutes for adoption, without objection? Okay, thank you. Item 3 and item 4 are consent items. Does anyone want to pull either one of those items? I would like to speak to item 4, but does anyone want to pull item 3? Okay, so why don't we start with item 3, which is the report pursuant to Assembly Bill 2833. Mr. Ailman is here as well. Betty, did you want to speak to that? Yes, go ahead, Ms. Yee. Just give me a second, Betty.
Oh, yeah. I have.
There you go.
the
Thank you.
floor. You're welcome.
Thank you, Terry. I wanted to pull this because I wanted to see if there was a way to entertain how we could provide this information, hopefully at less cost. I mean, it's pretty intensive and extensive. And I don't know if I think the statutory requirement was that we produce a report, but whether we could explore just perhaps having that information on our website. And I also had a question as to how many GPs CalSTRS had invested with prior to 2017 that refused to provide the cost data, just as a point of reference.
So let staff respond to those two inquiries.
Thank you. Deborah Smith, your Chief Operating Investment Officer. Yes, the report is an annual report. It's to be provided to the board. We can also provide it to the board on the website if that so pleases the committee. Also, the number of funds that did not grant us permission to publish information was about 160. The total scope was about 404, so about 160 did not allow us to publish the information.
And if I may add, as far as the costs to produce this report, we are already looking at efficiencies. We have the cost report that we produce and present in history. We've been presenting it every November. We have a vendor that helps us with that initiative. So we have combined the two efforts to gain some efficiencies. So there is a little bit of
Good, that's good to hear.
savings there.
Obviously, not to compromise any kind of disclosure or transparency, but it is a lot of information, and given the different experiences that we have with GPs, I just wanted to just talk about it.
Thank you, Betty.
All right, thank you.
Deborah?
I would just like to introduce Shafat Hassan. Some of you have met her at her previous title as Associate Portfolio Manager. Shafat Hassan competed for a competitive process and won, and she's now my investment operations director over investment compliance, ethics reporting, and investment performance.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nothing else on item 3. Item 4 on the consent agenda, I would just bring your attention to INV 30. And really for the purpose of our members who have just joined us in the last few months, the investment committee each year identifies a topic or two which we believe should be a priority for the organization and for the investment committee from a policy perspective, and then we ask the staff to walk through and work with us on that topic. An example of that would be the CalSTRS collaborative model that we've spent the last year and a half on, and we're close to executing as to why we want to do that. So we educate ourselves when we get a baseline knowledge, information, and understanding as to why we're pursuing a policy initiative. So in consultation with Vice Chair Joy Higa, also hearing from Kirsty Jenkinson, but more importantly at our offsite a little over a year ago, our Chief Investment Officer for the past 18 years had mentioned, for the first time I heard, and he had said it on a couple of different occasions, that there are two real big issues before us in the years to come, those being climate and China, and how the committee thinks about and understands the implications of those concepts. From his perspective, were important, not inconsistent with what we're hearing in so many places. So Joy and I chatted, and we certainly heard from Kirsty Jenkinson in her first presentation to us, that the issue of climate and climate risk, the risks and opportunities for institutional investors on a long-term basis, is something important for this committee to wrestle with. And I think first and foremost, to get a common understanding as to what are we really talking about? Why is it important for institutional investors? What does it mean from a policy perspective for us? What are the risks of status quo, of not changing? What are the opportunities that will present themselves to us as long-term investors over the long run across the entire portfolio? So Joy and I are recommending, and it's referenced on INV 30, that we place on our work plan, in addition to our continued asset liability study, our risk budget education, and the monitoring the implementation of the collaborative model, those three big initiatives, but that we add for the 1920 calendar, the transition to a low-carbon future and its implications for CalSTRS and institutional investors. And that is our recommendation, and we would hope that it would be embraced and endorsed by our colleagues on the committee. Questions or comments? Dana?
So Chris, as we look at the low-carbon future, how deep a dive are we going to do, or would it even be part of it, of what our actual fossil fuel holdings are?
Well, I think that has to be part of it, I think, number one, we, not just you, but we as the staff need education. We're not climatologists. We can't predict the future. So we need some education. We do need to look at our base exposure now, and this is a very interesting study. Obviously, New York Common has started a bit on it. New York City is starting to look at it, because you'll hear me say this many times, predicting the future is an inexact science, and understanding how the climate's going to be impacted and what governments are going to do, I think. So we'll take that top-down look at it, but then also a bottom-up within our portfolio and figure out what are some of our peers doing in terms of setting targets and limits, and what do we want to do.
Are we thinking about doing this all in-house? Are we thinking
Oh, no.
about we would hire a third party?
Kirsty and I have already talked about, and Jack's given us, we've indicated we'd love to be on your offsite agenda in October with some initial education for you, because it's a long time to wait till next January, but to then begin to really a lot of education of realizing, okay, what are the multiple ramifications and the time period. I've often said, if we all agreed the ocean was going to rise, there's still two really critical facts we have to know. One, by how much? 3 centimeters or 3 meters? And number two, is that a 2025 event, 2030, or is it a 2100 event? And put it in practical implications. That would totally change your perspective on how interested you would be, I'll say, in Miami real estate or the southern part of New York real estate. So those are things, I don't know if we'll get to the point that we want to try and make that kind of a bold prediction, but we do have to start to understand. And as I said, as Harry described at the offsite, what I tried to say to you is we've generally been a passive shop. One of our investment beliefs is that the markets are largely efficient, meaning the markets have priced this in. I said last week at Milken that I think they're starting to misprice it, but it's that time perspective of when will this occur. So I think that's what we'll have to decide. And I'm challenging you because I think we're, with China and particularly climate change, we're going to have to make more active decisions about positioning this portfolio with the risk of being wrong, but then also the risk of being right, but being right too early. Because you've heard me say, being right too early, like a decade early, is indistinguishable from being wrong. So these would be a real challenge, I think, for us, and we'll bring in lots of information. Brian and Harvey would want that record being very thick before we arrive at a conclusion on what to do. And sorry to belabor, but also that challenge we faced. Does the board want to make that call? Do you want staff to make that call? Or do we want to delegate that to managers to try and make that call?
Thank you.
Betty?
Thanks, Harry. I, for one, appreciate the addition of a focused look at this. There's so many facets to this that I think we really, as an investment committee, need to understand what all of them are. And I do want to give Chris a shout out with respect to his remarks at Milken last week. And if you haven't heard them, I thought he was spot on with respect to really in terms of how the market is treating this in terms of pricing, that it essentially isn't. And so when we look at the decisions we have to make about where we put our assets, and certainly understanding that climate change is real, but we also need to understand the science a little bit more precisely. But I think this is also an opportunity to look at what many of our global peers are doing. There have been many efforts of which CalSTRS has been a leader in terms of how to look at uniform disclosure by companies. And so I think it also is an opportunity to bring some of those global initiatives and the tools that are already out there that could be employed as we begin to look at where we want to go as a fund.
Thank you, Betty. Keith?
I think I agree it's a good idea that we put this on there, but I wasn't quite sure about what we intend. You know, low carbon. And what our role is in this. There's and many of these thoughts are unformed, so it's just to put out there as a consideration. But there are implications in a low carbon kind of a future, that there are issues about whether or not economic growth can continue and what we mean by that. If we're talking about the efficacy of renewables, which is starting to come under some scrutiny, and then if we accept the need to reduce or at least not increase carbon emissions and other things, we may be talking about maintaining a status quo that from an environmental standpoint is one thing to say, but from an overall global perspective, when you're talking about sovereign nations and the concerns of different countries to take care of their people and what their interests are. In the most extreme, you can get to the point of the developed countries basically saying, okay, everything stays the same. You know, where the United States is using what? I've seen all kinds of figures, 25% of the energy use, but has whatever, 5% or X percent of the population. Inherent in that is a potential for conflict over, well, who gets to keep it? I mean, is this kind of like, if you keep it level or reduce carbon emissions, and if you assume out that renewables help us but don't necessarily get us over a total reduction, then we're talking about who is to reduce or who is to maintain the same. How do you, as one country who is trying to develop and trying to better the situation for their people, the economics for their people, say, why can't we develop if this is the extent of the technical development, and if we can't increase carbon, what do we do? So there's a potential political conflict, global political conflict there that's, maybe 10, 20, 30 years out, but nevertheless. So how do we, as a investment, kind of consider that? And there's a whole issue about whether we can, reducing carbon I've seen people assert that reducing emissions may imply an actual reduction in standard of living for many people. What does that mean? And is that what we're looking at? Is that something we even should consider? Should we just consider where can we make money in the meantime? Or what is our proper role in that?
Sure.
So, just a
so
question.
Chris, before you jump in, let me try to frame this a little bit. I'll state the obvious. I'm not an environmental expert. I'm not a Scientologist. I'm a science person. I'm not that either. I'm not that either. There's a lot of things I'm not. But what I am is the chair of this committee. And what I do know, and I think what we do know, is that issues around the environment and energy and investing are just at the epicenter of a global conversation. We see and we hear about Middle Eastern countries that are looking to diversify their portfolios away from oil and gas. The purpose of this item and putting it on our work plan is first and foremost is for us as a committee and us as an organization to get some common knowledge and common language around what are we talking about when it comes to climate risk. Why are we spending resources and time, human capital, studying this issue? So a common baseline language and understanding of what we're talking about. And then through that process is what are the implications for large pools of capital like CalSTRS for the next, not 10 weeks or 10 quarters, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now? Then what, if anything, should we do within our policy to make adjustments that would best position this institution and this portfolio to take advantages of opportunities? And through this process of studying this issue, we may come to the conclusion that we don't need to do anything. We don't need to do anything different. Or we may come to the conclusion that there are things that we need to do differently for the long term, for the benefit of ultimately, as we said on the prep call, we're doing this because we want to find out whether or not there would be risks to the performance of the overall portfolios for us not to do anything. We don't know that. We're told, a lot of people think yes. Other people say, well, not so much. We want to find out based on a lot of information and come to a decision as to whether or not we need to do anything. Because if we do something different across all the asset class, it's being driven by a belief based on knowledge that we can take advantage of opportunities that will present themselves that will generate better risk-adjusted returns for this pension fund over decades. So there are a lot of questions, Keith, that we don't even have the answers to yet. There are probably a lot of questions we don't even know, that we don't know the questions yet. But what Joy and I are saying, and I think our senior team is supporting as well, is that it's deserving of concentrated focus, not piecemeal by presentations of people who want us to divest or people who don't want us to divest or presentations. But this organization is aligned that this is a priority for us, that we're going to put some resources behind it so that we can get to a baseline knowledge about best positioning this portfolio to most, to better position itself to generate the risk-adjusted financial returns over the long term around climate risk and climate change. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well said.
Sharon.
I just want to lend my support. I think it's important that we're looking at this now. I think we've had a lot of engagement from, members asking and thinking about this issue. I also do think it's really important that we frame it around our fiduciary duty and the risk and return to CalSTRS. There's a lot of things we could talk about. I went to Ceres last week. It was amazing, water and energy and so much happening. But to me, I appreciate your comments to really focus it on sort of what are the risks and possible rewards for us as we look at this, the climate risk. So I fully support it. I think its time is now. And I think especially as long-term investors, one of the challenges is, there's a lot happening that we see already in the world. And so I think trying to figure out kind of where we see the risks is part of our fiduciary duty. So I'm glad to see this item on the work plan.
Thanks. Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to commend staff and this board for being so perceptive to address an issue that I think will have long-term impact on all of us, and especially since we have a statutory plan that requires us to deal with not only the returns we get, but many other issues. This is one that I think we should take up. But you also mentioned another, and this was really the point of my question was, you said the other risk that we should be looking at is China. And yet I didn't hear anything directly on that point. So is that going to be taken up later, or?
Because you're new.
So, yeah, again,
I'm sorry, but I didn't see it on the
it's great.
on the plan.
It's spot on. And the reason it's not there yet is a few years ago, we made a decision, and this committee can make a different decision. We made a decision that we wanted to focus in on one major initiative at a time.
Okay.
Not that the other ones won't get focused, but as a committee, we wanted to accomplish something material and meaningful, CalSTRS collaborative model. So the team is very focused on China. It will be staggered into the work plan.
It's in the queue.
It's in the queue. Good way of putting it. It's in the queue.
And it's been part of Chris's
It has not been forgotten. And we think that there's some other factors that make this more likely for us to get some momentum around versus China that we don't have any control over right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, this item, if no one else wants to speak to this issue, this will come back in July for a formal adoption. And thank you for your support of the item and the focus that we'll place on it. Well, so, thank you. It's on consent, so if there's no objection, it's been moved to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you, Chris. Which brings us to item number 5. And as we're transitioning to that, I do want to recognize one of our members of our staff. I was at an event recently, and someone came up to me and said, do you know June Kim? I said, of course I know June Kim. She manages public equities for us. And June Kim is being recognized and acknowledged for her by WIN, Women in Investing Network in Los Angeles. June, please, for her leadership. Her extraordinary leadership with that organization and advancing the role of women and young women in investing and exposing them to finance and financial literacy. We're very proud of you, June. So thank you for that work. Okay, item 5, Kirsty. And I do
Great.
know we have members of the public who want to speak. The process is we're going to hear from our director, Kirsty Jenkinson, and then we will hear from our board, and then we'll take public comments on this important issue. Item
Great.
5.
Thank you very much, Harry, and hello, everybody. For those I haven't had a chance to speak more fully with, I'm Kirsty Jenkinson. I lead the Sustainable Investment and Stewardship Strategies team here at CalSTRS for the last 4 months, so very happy to be with you again. With me today is Aisha Mastagni, who is also one of the team leaders in our team. She's going to be helping me present on the policy item that we're discussing in front of you, which obviously follows on very naturally, I think, from the discussion that we just started having about the low carbon transition. So specifically to turn our attention, I don't have slides for this, so I'm going to talk you through the rationale for the policy. It's to request the committee's approval of new policy language regarding CalSTR's response to the low carbon economic transition, and also specifically our support for carbon pricing. I'm going to explain the impetus for the agenda item. Aisha is going to, with her significant experience in the policy structure that we have here at CalSTRS, walk you through why we've chosen to put it where we have. I'm then going to also briefly explain our specific choice of language. I think that's very important, and orientate you regarding our ongoing activities to address climate change, and then comment on some follow-up actions. So as I think is clear in the 2 committee meetings that I've been with you with since I started in January, and came out in the last discussion, addressing the low carbon economic transition is a priority for us. And I firmly believe that at CalSTRS we must optimally position the portfolio, as you so eloquently put it, Harry, for the low carbon transition. But we also have a role to play to continue to use our voice as an investor to influence a transition that does help the world mitigate and adapt to climate change in an orderly and in an equitable manner as well. And that's really important. And we'll have a lot of discussion about that as I think we go through the board education process about what that actually means and how it can best be achieved. So as we know, given the focus that the committee and staff will be having on this, we also welcome the letter that the Controller Betty Yee sent to all of you requesting staff specifically include language supporting carbon pricing in our investment policies, which also gave rise to this agenda item as well. So thank you very much. So before I dive into the details, I'm hoping Aisha can orientate you to where we are going to be putting this policy and why. So Aisha.
Thank you. Again, my name is Aisha Mastagni. I'm a portfolio manager in the Sustainable Investment and Stewardship Strategies team. Thank you. I thought it might be helpful not only for our brand new board members, but also for some of our newer board members, just to understand a little bit of the history of our policies and principles. So the corporate governance policy and principles dates back to the 1970s. It's some of our oldest policies for CalSTRS. And in 2006, 2007 time period, CalSTRS signed on to the UNPRI. And that's what sort of developed our statement of investor responsibility or statement of shareholder ESG responsibility. And then in April of 2011, actually, I'm going to back up for a second. What's in your packet, the principles and the 2 attachments, used to be part of the Teachers Retirement Board manual. That huge document where all the other investment policies are. It was buried in there. And in April of 2011, we decided to remove the principles along with the attachments to not only elevate the principles, because it's one way we sort of influence the market, but also to sort of help brand CalSTRS and all the activities that we were doing. Plus, we wanted it to be more accessible to external parties. So the companies in which we invest, we wanted it to be readily accessible to other, our investment peers and other stakeholders. So we took it out of the Teachers Retirement Board manual, we put it a separate place on the website, and from there it's continually evolved. The principles themselves are mainly focused around our proxy voting activities. You know, it's how we vote on directors, it's how we look at exec comp, how we look at shareholder proposals. The statement for ESG responsibility has a somewhat broader approach. it's all of our stewardship activities, because how we engage with companies now and how we influence the market isn't just through our proxy voting activities. I think historically that was our primary focus, but it's evolved since then. And now we influence the market in a variety of ways, not just through proxy voting, but engagement activities, partnering with peers. And so that's why we thought that the carbon pricing statement fit best in that attachment. That being said, all of those the principles themselves, the statement for ESG responsibility and the ESG risk factor policy, they all work together. And so it's important that those are communicated to the marketplace.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Aisha. So to dive into some of the specifics of the language, the first paragraph focuses on our belief, as you can see, that how the world responds to the risks associated with climate change is material to the impact of our investment portfolio. So as we were talking about earlier, as prudent fiduciaries of the system, we have to understand these risks, but we also can identify opportunities to invest in solutions. So I think it's pretty strong that it's our job to conduct this kind of thoughtful analysis that will identify the winners and the losers in the low carbon transition, because we believe that that will help preserve the financial future of the California educators that we serve. But the second part supports or emphasizes our support specifically for the role that carbon pricing can play in reducing emissions. And as you know, reducing emissions is what is the ultimate goal of the Paris Climate Agreement and for all concerned about climate change. We believe, as the controller emphasized in the letter, that carbon pricing, whether it be through a carbon tax or through a cap and trade mechanism, and there are different ways, and we are deliberately being agnostic and saying it is up to the market and the different jurisdictions to decide what is appropriate, that we believe that this kind of carbon pricing, it is an efficient way to steer economic actors towards a low carbon future. Now, finding politically acceptable ways to price pollution, it will drive consumer behavior, it will drive business strategy, and it will drive investment flows. So as you can see, I think what we're trying to do in our proposed policy language is the need for us to not only analyse our own portfolio, but join the growing chorus, of which we're already part, and includes many of our peers in the global investment community in calling on the world's governments to meet the global emissions reductions targets that they have committed to. But it would be remiss of me to sort of say that if anybody in the room thinks that getting a price on carbon and addressing the urgency of climate change is going to be easy, it's not going to be easy. I think we can all see that. There are a multitude of challenges ahead, not least ensuring that any low carbon transition doesn't already exacerbate economic inequality. You know, one has to only just think of the coal miners and their families who no longer have jobs as to think about the challenges that this poses to us. And also it threatens to, as I think you were hinting at, Mr. Yamanaka, about heightening geopolitical risks in the global community as well. These are all things that we need to be extremely acutely aware of, and as we study it and go forward, we'll be spending more time on. But that being said, because I'm not here to sort of speak doom and gloom, I'm also here to say I want to highlight two real points that I think are going to cast these challenges in a more positive light. Firstly, I appreciate that the committee, all of you, you're going to be hearing from a number of students who are with us today to remind us of the urgency of addressing climate change. And I think obviously it's essential that we listen to and are inspired by those whose futures are currently in our hands. So to all of you that have taken the time to join us, thank you. Let me share really fundamentally that CalSTRS shares your concern about the planet. But secondly, the other point that I think is really a bright light in this is I think that the way that CalSTRS can continue to have the most impact in reducing global carbon emissions is to collaborate with other global investors. And we're involved in an initiative called the Climate Action 100+ to spur over 100 of the world's largest corporate greenhouse gas emitters to align their business strategies with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I firmly believe that it's this collective action which is happening at a scale that we've never witnessed before amongst global investors, will actually be more effective in reducing emissions and will have more impact than divesting our shares of the world's largest fossil fuel companies. In my mind, divestment pushes the problem elsewhere, often to short-term focused investors who frankly and very disappointingly don't care or care a lot less about the environment. But I think the role that we must play, both as a fiduciary and as a market participant, and not least have the opportunity to play through the Climate Action 100, is that we can work with 320 of our closest friends in the global investment community, representing $33 trillion in assets under management. So again, it's this unprecedented global collaboration, and it's already demonstrating the power of investor engagement. Just to cite a few examples that we recently can take note of, Shell, which is, as you know, an Anglo-Dutch oil and gas company, recently made an unprecedented commitment to reduce its emissions across its entire value chain. Glencore, the world's largest mining company, has agreed to cap global coal production and reduce its global emissions. Maersk, the world's largest ocean shipping company, has committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And AEP, the US's sixth largest utility, has set a new goal to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 and 60% by 2030. Every single one of these companies has pointed to explicitly the role of investors and encourage them to promote a business model that will see them to be resilient not only today but through 2050 and beyond. And so that gives me great satisfaction and also challenge to continue to work with these peers. It's just a few of the results that the group has achieved. My colleagues Brian Rice and Travis Antoniono, who lead a lot of our work on this, they're actually not with us today because they're representing CalSTRS and leading another global investor delegation at a meeting with Southern Company today, making similar requests. Take action to reduce emissions, provide better information to investors to help us analyze risk, and articulate your company's strategy to oversee these risks. So I hope that's helped explain, why the low carbon transition is a priority, why our new policy language is an important first step in clarifying and articulating this, how we're going to continue to engage companies with our fellow global investors, and that we're very much looking forward to working with you in the years ahead to understand collectively the impacts that the low carbon transition is going to have across our investments and across our investment markets. So I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Ms. Jenkinson. Thank you so much. Any comments or questions? Controller Yee, Betty?
Thanks, Harry. I'm not going to speak much on this, but I just wanted to applaud Christy, Aisha, and the team for really elegantly putting this policy in place. And I particularly like the textual paragraph that really speaks to the world response associated with risk of climate change. And I think amidst all of this, I really begin to feel like, we're just like a little small piece of something that's just so, beyond our reach. And yet, I know that given who we are as an institutional investor, as a large institutional investor that has provided a lot of leadership thus far with our partners, that, I think our voice really matters here. And so I also mentioned that CalPERS, our sister fund, is also on the is prepared to adopt a similar policy in the next month or two. So this is something that I think is really important. And then I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just at least say that I'm hopeful that one day soon we can have some national leadership on this.
From your mouth to God's ears.
Joy? Joy, I think you have to ring back in. I think for some reason. Thanks.
We can hardly hear you back here.
Here we go.
Okay.
This will be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Betty, for your comments. I also, strongly support what we're doing with this initiative, and I just wanted to thank Kirsty, you and Aisha for the leadership that you've, we've started, we've had over several years, and that you're both continuing. Also hearing, Kirsty, about some of the examples that you gave of companies around the world that are specifically taking action and making commitments to address this issue. And doing so because they've been pushed by investors to look at and consider the issue, I think is something really important for the committee and our stakeholders to hear about, because we are making a difference working with our other investors to move in the right direction. So thank you.
Joy. Seeing no one else in the queue, this is an action item. We'll hear from the public in a moment. The recommendation is on INV 34. There's an accompanying memo from Makita on INV 89, and Controller Yee's letter from March 5th is INV 90. So I would entertain a motion to approve the recommendation, which is on INV 34. It's been moved by Bill. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion on it? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. The new language is adopted. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership and the opportunity for these collaborative partnerships with large institutions across the globe to make meaningful change for our investment portfolio and to make the world a better place. It will be wonderful to be part of that journey with everybody in this room, to continue the progress we've made and to move forward and carry on. Right. Thank you so much. So let's hear from the members of the public that are here.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do, this relates to the speakers that want to address you.
Yes, sir.
So because we're a public forum and we live stream over the web, and we have a group of minors, children who want to address you, and I know as teachers and as this board, you encourage that. However, we don't have parental permission for any of their images or voices to be transmitted. So the choices that the difficult choice we have to make is to allow them to speak, but not broadcast, or don't allow them to speak. So my suggestion is that we cease the live streaming on the web to allow them to address you, so their images and their voices are not transmitted without permission.
That's terrific. Do we need to take a break for that to happen, or it can just happen?
We have great people. I just need to turn around and tell them
Consider
to
it
make
done,
it so.
Brian. That's great. That's really the right approach to take. Dana?
Brian, I understand that we wouldn't live stream, but we're also videotaping this to be archived. Would they then be excluded from the tape?
Yes, we would not tape them either. We don't have permission to tape them either.
Thank you.
Yep, get it. Thank you for that caution and acknowledge. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. We are back live stream, so being broadcast publicly. Steve, it's item number 6, is that right? Which is an action item, and there's a lot in this item, and Margot and Rob are going to tee it off, and then I'm going to ask Makita to comment briefly and bring to the attention the committee the accompanying letter from Makita on INV 135 as the advisor to the investment committee on private equity. There's an accompanying letter that supports the recommendations and also monitors some of the, as we're going forward with some of these issues as well, that this is not the end of this is but the beginning of the end of part of it. It's an ongoing process. Does that make sense?
Did you guys follow
Is that right?
Maybe I'm after lunch,
Yeah.
but
The important,
the end of part of it.
exactly. Margot.
Okay. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm Margot Worth. I'm the Director of Private Equity. I'm here with Rob Ross. He's a portfolio manager in the group. And Steve Hart, he is at Makita. So as Harry mentioned, this is a action item, item number 6. This is a third reading. This deals with policy changes for the private equity policy. This is kind of, I would characterize it as an omnibus sort of benchmark change. Is going to touch a lot of aspects and sections of the policy, but I'm going to give you the main takeaway. There are a lot of things in it, but the most substantive thing is a addition of 3 new benchmarks for 3 out of our 6 sub-assets. Those 3 sub-assets are the smallest sub-assets, so in total, it's less than 10% of the portfolio. So the big item here is a benchmark change for about 10% of the portfolio. As we go through this, I'm going to try to give some context. There's various overlapping initiatives we've been doing in private equity, and I just want to kind of refresh people's history of what we've done so far and what we're doing here, and also a little primer and catch up for the new board members. So I'm going to talk about four initiatives that are going on in private equity and in the investment branch. So, and three of them are dealing with affect our policy. So one thing you'll notice if you went through the policy, a lot of changes. We have reformatted the policy. So there was a task force at the board's direction to come up with a standardized format to use for all of the asset classes. And this represents the new format. And we've moved things, we've deleted things, we've added stuff that's going to be common to other asset classes in the policy. And so when we tried to redline it to show the changes, it just was impossible. So we actually came up with 4 colors of modifications to follow that. That's on INV 118. The other thing that is substantive there in the format changes, we did rewrite a few sections, in particular the special mandate section. So we think that's clearer and more updated. It had been a decade or so since we wrote the last part of that. So that's one of the 4 initiatives. I'm going to save the benchmark for last. The second one, I want to we've been going to the board a lot. One dealt with delegation of authority. That's not affected here, but I just want to remind the folks that one set of our meetings had to do with the delegation of authority. The program's gotten bigger. We've raised the delegation of authority on existing relationships for new partnerships with existing managers from 400 to 750. We doubled the co-investment delegation of authority from 125 to 250. The third initiative that has been involved in our policy and is still ongoing is the collaborative model. So the collaborative model involves the asset classes, primarily the private asset classes, but all of the asset classes, finding ways to reduce fees and carry by collaborating with various business partners and other limited partners and such. As that applies to private equity, that means primarily co-invest. And so we have in the past done some policy changes in the last year, besides the aforementioned limit on co-investment from 125 to 250. We also changed some of the formula, some of the restrictions on how much we could do relative to the general partner. We also made it so that we can come into the deals earlier. And importantly, as is needed in the market now, we are now able to absorb losses if we come in early and a deal falls through. Not something we want to do, but it's something that makes us much more competitive in the market on the sourcing. So what we're doing here are some technical changes to that. And one of the other most substantive change with respect to that is that we can now do deals with existing partners across the platform. So if real estate has a relationship with a partner XYZ and they have a private equity arm and they have a deal that's often what we're seeing now that's partially private equity, partially real estate, we now have, if this proposal is accepted, we would have the ability to have more latitude there to source co-invest. Before we leave the collaborative model, I just want to say that that's a big initiative for us. And in conjunction with the collaborative model, we did put together an item, I guess it goes all the way back to November 18, item number 7. And we kind of laid out the plan for private equity. And we also, as an attachment, included a history of the program, and another attachment is kind of the history of the industry as we saw it. So for new board members or other board members, I just want to suggest that that's a good resource. And in fact, we have printed copies here after the presentation if anybody is interested. And for the public version of this, which is very similar, is on the website. That was a March 19, March of this year, item 11. So that's collaborative model. So that's 3 of the 4. The last item is benchmark. I think I'll just pause and see if there's any questions before we move on to the benchmark.
Second, Margo. Let me see if there's questions here. Dana?
So Margaret, you were talking about being able to invest with an existing general partner, and you talked about across asset classes and things like that, so, and I totally understand that. But I guess my question to you, is that too limiting? If the only way that we can co-invest is with an existing partner, it seems to me that there might be an opportunity where we had a previous partner that we don't have an existing relationship with, that we might have an opportunity to co-invest with them.
That has been discussed, and what you're verging on there is, in a sense, you're co-investing, but in a sense, you're moving toward a direct investment model.
Okay.
So I think it is something that, you know, I don't think we're done here because the industry is moving fast. And, you know, a lot of what we're doing through these series of policy changes is catch up because we had not really done much. And part of it is adapting to the rapidly changing environment which we're in. So I think we're not asking for that now, but that is something that we discussed and in fact asked, well, should we ask for this now? And we thought, no, let's hold off. We have this.
Thank you.
I would also state that Karen had a few edits on the report. We've included those. So there are some, I think, technical edits and just some plain proofreading edits. I think a couple words got deleted. This 4 colors of redlining was pretty tricky. So
Before we go,
It's definitely labor intensive.
yes.
And
Dana,
Dana, I
you're done?
believe,
Well, I did have one of Margo's mentioned those, if I can, you want to put me back on the queue.
yeah, help me get you back into the top of
Just
the
want to
queue.
make sure.
How do I do that, Dana? Do I click on?
You click on
I'm
it
trying
and
to
then,
add, go previous.
there you go.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we capture that it's 3 or less in a single transaction.
that's right, for the secondary
Thank you.
market
Yeah.
transactions, that's been made.
Thanks. The
Appreciate that.
secondary market transactions.
We said more than 3 and less than 3, and
We want to make sure we get 3.
we left out the
3 or less.
possibility of 3.
Now we've got Dana and
Thanks.
Karen tag teaming. You're definitely, nothing's
We
gonna
think
go
it's
by.
great.
Dana, are you?
Super helpful.
Done? Okay. I would just ask staff and my colleagues if you're referencing something in the documents, if you could just reference the page so those of us that can refer to it, okay? We have, got it.
Robin and Margo.
All right, so we have 3 members of the committee that are in the queue. Fiona, then Betty, then Bill. Fiona?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, some of us formed Trustees United to really focus more attention on companies who perhaps are not taking allegations seriously. So I'm just wondering what our rights or our process is if there are companies that we are invested in, either on the real estate side or the private equity side. What is our ability to dig deeper, get maybe the executives to come and talk about, you know, what is happening at their companies, you know, whether it's true or not, and if it is, you know, what they're doing to remedy the situation.
Well, I would say in co-investing in private equity in general, we are a limited partner, and it does limit, and we're also a minority. So we are limited by both by the agreement itself and by the statutes. And I looked across to Brian about what a limited partner can do. So that doesn't mean we are powerless or take that stance, but we When we hear a complaint, we take it seriously. We always listen and we start monitoring. And what we like to tell a party that, I'm going to call it an accusation or an observation that they think a partner is working wrong, we escalate our attention, but we're not the adjudicators typically. We're not. We wait and let them know that if our partner is found doing something wrong, either irresponsible or illegal or unethical, then we'll lower the boom. But there is a limitation there on what is appropriate for us to do in the situation. And again, even though we're one of the biggest private equity players and we're often one of the biggest limited partners in the deal, it would be unusual for us to have more than 2 or 3% of beneficial interest in a company.
So just to follow up, so have there been any situations in the past where this has happened, where we have had allegations against a company and we're trying to figure out what is happening, what was, what has our team done?
So, and I'll look to Chris. I mean, I can think of the strawberry pesticide. I can think of the Hilton Hotel. I can think of the Taylors in Ohio, where we did get involved, write letters, and talk to the general partner and ask them, it is your decision, but have you considered this? Are you aware of this? And wouldn't it really be better if you did that?
Margo, if I could interject, I think it might also be helpful if we heard from our CIO on this issue as well, a little bit more. That would be helpful to hear from you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I just wanted to echo what Margot's comments, and I think you ran through them. There was a Japanese pesticide company. You mentioned Hugo Boss, I think, in Cleveland. We certainly had Toys R Us, where we were not even in the partnership, but had a relationship with the general partner, and we tried to step in. You mentioned the hotel.